A very good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Adrenalin Thought Leadership Webinar series. Adrenalin E-Systems Limited prides itself on being the leader in the HR tech space. The past year has shown the increasingly important role that HR is playing as a function and also becoming an integral player in business strategy and decisions. And we're all about having conversations around this new role play. To this effect, Adrenalin hosts thought leadership webinars where we invite stalwarts to share their thoughts and working models on current trends, which will greatly benefit not only the community, but also organizations. Today, we have with us Mr. Ganesh Raman to share his views on a much needed topic for the present times as we move into a hybrid work model, how to make learning from training stick. Hi Ganesh, how are you?
Nice to meet you, Azrela, again, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody who's listening in.
To say a few words about Mr. Ganesh Raman, he is an organizational development and HR digital transformation expert with over 2 decades of experience in establishing company-wide processes and systems in the areas of L&D, performance management, competence management, and talent management in mid to large size organizations. His rich, varied, and deep OD experience also includes setting up L&D functions and building lasting learning cultures. As a trainer and facilitator, over the years, he has designed and conducted leadership and behavioral skills programs for over 10,000 individuals across a dozen different industries. He is a chartered member of CIPD UK and an accomplished public speaker. Attendees, if you have any questions along the way throughout the session, kindly add them in the questions or chat window in your right panel, and we will address it towards the end of the session. Without further ado, please take it away, Mr. Ganesh.
Thank you very much, Azrela. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely happy to be amongst you. Thank you for joining in. As Azrela pointed out, this is a thought leadership session. So what I'm going to be offering to you are some food for thought. And if you take away even 1 or 2 ideas from here and you believe you can go back and implement these, then I'd be really, really happy. So it's a short session, so let's get cracking. Let me share my screen now. So Azrela, if you could please confirm you're able to see the screen.
Yes, we are able to see it. Perfect.
Excellent, brilliant. Yeah, so let's address the elephant in the room. We all know, we spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on training every year. But does learning from all of this training really endure? Does it really last? And does it really stick to employees that undergo such training? I think had it been a resounding yes, then all organizations would be really great places to work. Managers would be doing a great job of managing their teams. Everyone would be happy. Employee satisfaction scores would go through the roof. Performance-wise, employees would be performing absolutely brilliantly. Nobody would ever leave the company. We wouldn't have attrition. And we'd just have happy people performing to their optimum. But we all know that is not the case, right? And I think we should begin by acknowledging, if at all, we have a serious problem or a small problem or a problem at all. So with Azrela's help, I'm going to initiate us into the session with a brief poll. It's more to acknowledge what's happening in our companies, in the client's place that we are supporting. So I find that many organizations find it difficult to keep learning enduring. So it dissipates very quickly. So poll is open. Does your company or your client face this issue where learning from training sessions goes away very quickly? So I think we're waiting for perhaps 1 or 2 more responses. Excellent. So whenever you're ready, Azrela, you can share the results.
Yeah. We have a 92% yes and 8% no.
Brilliant. Excellent. It's excellent for the 8% who don't have that problem. But perhaps, what we shared today might give them some further ideas to go and implement. For the 92% of organizations who actually face this issue, I think it's to be expected. Because over the years, I've realized we spend so much energy and so much effort in creating training programs, designing them, and rolling them out, that we pay very little attention to ensuring that the learning from this training is sustained and it's translated into change of behavior and change of performance. So hopefully, by the end of today's little discussion, you'll get some more ideas about the things that you could look at perhaps more closely than you have in the past to start making such changes. So as we ease into the discussion today, I'd like to share with you a short, very brief story. This is borrowed from a Zen parable, something that I had read many, many years ago, almost 20 years ago. But it stuck with me, and I think some of it will stick with you as well today. It's called the rap. Of course, it's not rap music. Rap music wasn't born those many years ago, perhaps. But the rap, if you look at the English dictionary and the meaning for the rap, it is a knock or a whack. And typically, if you are a monk in a Shaolin temple and you're undertaking some training, your teacher is likely to rap you on the head with a knuckle to either admonish you or punish you or draw your attention to something. So that's what the rap is. Okay, so long story short, this story has about 3 characters. So I'm going to give these characters some names so that we can remember them. Let's call the student Chan. If you're fans of martial arts, then Jackie Chan. So let's call the student Chan. Let's call his teacher Lee, as in Bruce Lee. And the head of the temple, we will call him Master Shifu. Okay, so this is borrowed from the Kung Fu Panda series, if you're a fan. So Chan's been at the temple many years, and he's been learning and picked up all the skills that the temple had to offer. And one day when he was meditating and contemplating, he thought that perhaps it was time for him to leave the temple, go down to the villages and towns near the temple and educate the masses, share his knowledge, share his skills with the masses, and prepare them. Now, obviously, Shaolin temples, when somebody enters the Shaolin temple, they rarely ever exit it. You kind of spend your entire life at the temple. So this was a unique case, and he was very keen now on leaving the temple. So he went up to his teacher, which is Lee, and shared this idea. And Lee said, "Yeah, why not? Let me go and ask the chief abbot. I will ask Master Shifu if everything's all right with that idea." So Lee proceeds. So his teacher goes to the chief abbot and he explains what Chan is thinking. So the chief abbot nods, and Lee understands that yes, the chief abbot has provided the permission. So he comes back and tells Chan. So Chan is getting ready, packed, elated, excited about going down. And before he leaves, of course, he wanted to pay his respects to the chief abbot. So he goes to the chief abbot to pay respects. And as he bows down in front of the chief abbot raps him on the head. No words were exchanged. Chan was a little perplexed. He came back to his room. He sat there brooding, thinking what happened. He was trying to make sense of the interaction. So his teacher comes in, Lee, and he says, "Okay, everything's set. Are you about to leave?" So Chan narrates to him what happened with the chief abbot. So Lee finds it a little perplexing, and he says, well, he obviously gave the permission, so why did he do this? Let me go and check. So Lee goes back to the chief abbot, and he asks the chief abbot, I thought you gave him permission, so what happened? So the chief abbot said, look, now if Chan leaves the temple and he goes down and he teaches the masses in the villages and the towns around, by the time he returns, he would have grown and evolved into a master in his own right. And I, as his teacher, would never have been able to rap him on his head ever again. So I wanted to give him his last rap. Yeah. So this is a story that I remember very fondly, and I play it in my head again and again. And over the last 20 years, I've been doing this because there's so much to learn from this particular story. Of course, you can draw any number of analogies from here, but the ones that I'm really concentrating on today, specific to the environment in which either you perform or I've been performing, which is creating learning and development cultures and experiences and programs. What is it that this little story can teach us? So some of the things that I'd like you to kind of pay attention to, focus on, are the following. One is, a Shaolin temple is not your ordinary temple. It's built far away from civilization. It's either in the middle of a deep forest, a very dangerous forest, or it's up on the top of a mountain, very difficult to access. And only those people who finally get access to that are accepted, and they're accepted because of their competence and their potential. So that's number one, right? So where this temple is. Now, the same Shaolin temple, if you were to build it in the middle of a town, like we have these karate classes every nook and corner in your cities, you can imagine the kind of impact it would have on a student. So the kind of impact that Chan at a Shaolin temple would receive versus somebody who's doing this in the middle of a town. So remember, the setting of where the temple is also of significance. The other thing that's significant is, the chief abbot realizes that when you go and apply your learning, when you go and teach other people about what you have learned, you grow, you evolve, and you become a master in your own right. And that application and that doing is extremely important for the learning to manifest and the learning to actually be grounded in you. So you become the change that the training program is trying to bring about in you. The other thing that's significant is, of course, the presence of his teacher, very important. Somebody who provides feedback, somebody who he can bounce off ideas with, somebody who will go and talk to the chief abbot, for example, on his behalf. Very important for people's careers and organizations. And if your training is meant to equip people to become better at performance, better at behaviors, better at efficiency and effectiveness, etc., in the organization, you obviously expect them to grow. And it's very important that the hierarchy, the chain of command, is aligned with that, is supportive of that. So both the teacher and the chief abbot are very important characters. And these are characters that you require in your organization if you really want your training and the learning from your training to endure, to sustain, to bring about the changes that you're looking for. So drawing from this story, and of course from my experience over the last 20 odd years, what do I believe are the critical factors for endurance of learning, right? There's a short session, so we won't get into too much detail on each of these, but we will talk about each of these specifically. So up on the top is setting. We'll come to what each of these mean and what I'm trying to convey to you through these. I'd like you to think about these and then try and think of your training programs and see how you can apply some of these ideas. So there's setting, then there's design of the training, there's experiences that people would have through the training. There are measures that you can take to ensure that learning is sustained. And of course, training is for the right audience. So we'll talk about each of these things a little more briefly, but not too much in detail. So let's go back to setting. Now, how do you understand setting? I find it easy. It's not a common term, and you are unlikely to find this in textbooks or even on Google for that matter, in the way that I would like you to understand setting. So think of setting as, if you were the director of a movie and you are going to now shoot a particular scene, you need a setting for that scene. And by that, what do we mean? You need, of course, the physical space. That, of course, goes without saying. But beyond the physical space, you need to look at the environment. So there's the lighting, there's the sound, there's the actual, the screenplay, how the stage is set, etc. Yeah, so those are the physical elements of the setting. Then you need your characters in place. Yes, and you've got to place them in a particular fashion, in a particular area, so that you're able to get the best shot. The whole thing needs to convey something. So there's a purpose for that shot. There's a philosophy behind why you're shooting it, the way you're shooting it, when you're shooting it, with whom you're shooting it, and under what circumstances you're shooting it, and where in that entire story, your movie, does this scene fit. So you consider so many different aspects if you're shooting one scene, right? All of these things are important for the perfect shot. And shots are what make an impact on us when we're looking at a movie, right? We will never remember the entire movie, but we will remember certain scenes, certain moments, and all of these elements are extremely important for it to be a success. So setting is very, very, very important. It's not something that a lot of people pay attention to. A lot of companies don't really pay attention to how you're introducing a training program, why you're introducing a training program, what's the overall approach, what do you want to get out of it, who are the main characters who have to play a significant role in the success of this training program, what's the context behind introducing such a program. We don't really think that deep. I believe it is very important because that's where the story of your success begins. Right. So let me give you an example. When we at Petrofac, when we introduced recently a diversity and inclusion program, this was something which had its roots in the UK, where the government of UK has now, through law, advised that companies' boards, the board of directors for companies who are chartered or instituted in UK, must have a certain number of female directors on the board. Now, the D&I, Diversity and Inclusion Program, has its roots in there, in the board of directors of the organization. And when we introduced this, we had to consider a few things. We had to consider the fact that this had to be rolled out quickly. All 15,000 employees should go through it. It has to be simple to be understood because we didn't have the time to really explain things. It had to be designed in a manner that it was consumable quickly, so it's not too long, it's not too short. It has to have this essence conveyed, and people have to understand that it's extremely important and it has to be done. So our setting started with a video recorded by the CEO of the organization talking about why diversity and inclusion was so important. And in his video, he spoke about the purpose, their targets, what is it that they are trying to achieve in the organization, what is the role of the employee, what is the role of management, and how diversity and inclusion targets are going to be reported back through our annual reports to the government in the UK. Now that has an impact. If the CEO's video is coming out and you're expected to obviously go through it and understand the essence and the setting behind the scenes of this particular program, it conveys the seriousness of it, right? Vis-a-vis a training department rolling out an e-learning for diversity and inclusion. So you can see and you can imagine what would be the impact. Right. Eventually, of course, it's the training department which releases the program. But with all of that backstory, with that context, with the video from the CEO, setting up the targets for the company, setting out the targets for the board of directors, telling everyone how they're going to be reporting this and how the annual report will have to carry these figures. That makes a huge difference. Another quick example I'll give you is about our graduate engineering program, something that's been running 15 years very successfully. And in fact, one of the graduates is now the COO of the organization. Another graduate who joined after a few years is now country manager in North Africa. And we've got loads of project directors in this company in Petrofac who are all from this pool of graduates. So when we run the graduate program, the first week, you won't believe it, the who's who is assembled to come and talk to this group of young engineers who have just come out of colleges from all over the Middle East and India, and brought into the Middle East office, sat in an auditorium of about 100 odd seats. And the who's who, starting from the CEO who comes from London, comes and addresses this group of people. The first full week is about senior leaders in the organizations coming and talking to this group of people. You can imagine as a young engineer, 21, 22-year-old, doing your first job, you're coming into the company and the whole top management is coming to address you. And the context, the physical setting of the auditorium, what they need to talk, they talk about the philosophy of the company, the history of the company, the org culture. They set the tone for this group of people to really be dedicated to the 2-year program that they're going to go. Yeah, and then as you graduate out of that 2-year program, then the impact is there for everyone to see. Yeah, so I've got plenty of examples in paucity of time. One of the things that we also do successfully to ensure that learning endures is that we link it up with other HR processes. So if you undergo training and there is an expected set of behaviors, for example, or you're going through leadership training, or you're going through a technical training, or a compliance mandatory training, these are all linkaged to wider HR processes like performance management and talent management. In fact, some of the programs have a direct linkage to what your final rating in your performance reviews at the end of the year could be. So when we do rollouts of our compliance programs in Petrofac, people are expected to comply with it, which means they have to complete it. And they're given a specific period of time within which they must complete it with all of that setting and etc. And if they fail to do that, they also know what are the consequences. And the consequences are very straightforward. You will not get beyond a rating of 2, which does not meet expectations fully in your performance review. For certain programs, it becomes important. Right? We can't do that for everything, but for certain programs, and you'll know which ones really require that kind of policing. But linkages to performance management, linkages to talent management, very important. In fact, when we do a management development program, it has a direct linkage with talent management. It's meant for high potentials, and we put through all the high potentials through a series of 3 different programs, 3, 4 different phases, in fact. So a quick question at this stage. Do you in your organizations tie L&D processes into wider HR practices? If you do, well and good, excellent, make that bond stronger. And if you haven't really done it yet, then I would strongly recommend that you should. So Azraela, you must be running the poll now. Yep, let's open.
Yep.
Great, I think the results are in, right? Excellent.
Hold on. Okay, we have 65% with yes and 35% with no.
Excellent. No, that's brilliant. So if you have programs that are tied into this, then I'm sure you already realize that it helps to ensure that people are taking it seriously, people are continuing to learn and apply. So, so that's brilliant. Okay, so then we go back to our slideshow. Let me just give me a second. There we go. All right, so the next element, obviously something that we all do very well and we pay a lot of attention to in terms of program design, because this is something that's really visible to everyone who's going through the program, who's designing it. And there are certain requirements, of course. So typically, I'm sure you all have programs which are either technical in nature, they're mandatory, you won't be allowed to work or start work or even continue work in certain cases, unless you actually went through that mandatory program. For example, on our construction sites, people have to go through a safety driving test, and they've got to go through that program where drivers on site are trained to drive safely in a construction site. These construction sites are huge, right? They're like 5 square kilometers sometimes. Behavioral skills, and then you've got these critical skills, right? So critical skills where there's a lot of attention to be provided, because if you don't do it well, you're going to cause serious damage. And if you do it really well, then of course the company profits tremendously from your skills. Design a program to maximize learning endurance. Now, what do I mean by that? Right. Over the years, I've seen lots of companies run communication skills programs, and very rarely I've seen them be more than a 2-day workshop. So I picked that as a common example because we tend to run a lot of managerial leadership programs, especially as 2-day workshops, or maybe a 1-day workshop, or maximum a 3-day workshop sometimes. But what we understand and we learn is people go through this workshop, and over the next couple of weeks, everything is wiped out clean. They don't remember anything, they don't practice anything, they don't apply anything. And nowadays, because of the pandemic especially, you'll find that there are not too many takers for workshops, especially 2-day, 3-day workshops for soft skills. In fact, most soft skills are now readily available as micro learning, and that's a design element. You see, you are able to reach more people with micro learning on soft skills. Plenty of options available out in the market, and you can reach 300, 400 people in one rollout. In fact, in Petrofac, over the last 2 years, as part of my digitalization efforts, we've actually moved a lot of our soft skills training into e-learning. In fact, 300 courses are now available to employees, 24/7, free of cost, without any approvals. And that's the way people want to learn now. Yeah. So whatever you design, whichever program you're designing, whether it's technical in nature, whether it's behavioral skills, whether it's compliance or mandatory courses, you've got to design thinking, what can I do to maximize learning over a period of time, right? So that people don't forget, people continue to apply, people continue to do things as the way that we expect them to do. So one of the communication programs that Petrofac ran, we designed it as a program for 6 months for the piping department within our engineering function. And over a period of 6 months, 25 people who were handpicked for this program were tracked. Feedback was sought for each of them every month. They were given additional learning, building over phases. For 6 full months, the skill was embedded. And there was constant attention for ensuring that learning is embedded, because it's a behavioral change after all, and it takes time. You can't expect a 2-day workshop or even a micro learning, self-learning to actually make any major impact. So if you're really looking for impact, then you've got to choose your program right, and also make sure that you're designing it for longevity. So the gestation period, for example, could be longer. Structure, very important. I don't have to talk too much about the structure. You alter the structure, you vary the structure, the impact of the program varies tremendously. All right, so you could have a structure which has an e-learning, self-learning up in the beginning. You could put in some face-to-face time, whether it's online or virtual or off-site. You could do any of those, and then you can follow it up with more coaching and mentoring. You could follow it up with some projects. You could do simulation. You could do all kinds of these combinations as part of your structure and the mode of delivery. So structure, mode of delivery, accessibility, and the instructional design elements, these are all, they go hand in hand. And all of these individually and collectively can seriously impact the effectiveness of your program. I think you probably already know that, but I've seen companies and departments pay very peripheral attention to design. But if you were to actually get this setting in order first and then get your design to work with the setting, you'll realize that your impact is doubled. In the end, I've very clearly said, be selective of what programs you offer, because impact and effectiveness is something that you can't achieve with mass rollout of programs. You've got to be selective about what programs will make the maximum impact and design for maximum learning. And that means you'll have to be selective. And in any case, I think in today's environment, companies will not spend on programs just for the heck of it. You will realize that they are focusing more and more on the effectiveness of programs, and they want to see change in performance, change in the bottom line if possible. So be choosy about what you offer as a department, if you're a training department, as a company, if you're offering training programs, etc. Look to make change your target, look to make high performance your target, look to make sure that people are learning throughout, right? And it's not something that dissipates quickly. And designing a program like that is important. And part of the design is to also give people a wonderful experience. Yeah, so you'll all admit that learning happens and it sticks only by doing. The doing is very, very important. The application is very, very important. So in your design, please ensure that there is experiential learning for whatever change you're trying to bring. And that experiential learning needs to continue even after your workshop is over or your program is over. And the way to do that is to ensure that you facilitate this doing through company processes. You institutionalize the learning by making sure that there are conducive processes and conducive cultures where people can actually apply their learning. So what's the point of me going into a management development program and learning about strategic thinking if once I return to my department, I do not strategize? I don't get access to do strategy for the department. I don't really apply strategic thinking. It's a complete waste of time. And in terms of effectiveness of the program, really poor. Why? Because even though I kind of practice strategic thinking back in the workshop, and I've got material that I can read and continue to learn from, but if I don't apply it, it's a complete waste. So as a department, you've got to outreach, go into the departments and functions to make sure that anyone that you've actually pulled into a training program is able to go and apply it. One of the very common programs that are run nowadays in large organizations is dashboards, Power BI dashboards. And that's the craze, at least in Petrofac. It was a craze a couple of years ago, and everybody kind of went through Power BI. I did too. But I realized after going through it, and I was pretty good at it, I created some nice, beautiful dashboards while I was in the workshop. But once I came back, my role was such that I had team members who could do dashboards, who could do reports, and I really didn't have to do it. So over a period of time, within 3 months, I had kind of, my skills were rusty, but thankfully, the two guys that were working for me were able to continue to practice dashboarding. Pretty much every month, we were creating dashboards. So that skill was not wasted. Why? Because the doing was happening, the application was happening. For me, it wasn't. So it's a classic case where a lot of leaders and managers are put through programs just for numbers, but we don't really follow up and give them the experience to apply that learning. So it's also the job of the training department or the learning and development facilitators to make sure that application happens. So this is something that we, as an example, I told you about the communication program with the piping department. This is something that we built in the design. We asked them very specifically, so if they're learning this, how are they going to apply? How are we going to come and watch them apply this? Will you facilitate the doing? Will you give them the opportunity to do this? Very, very important. Any skill that you pick up. You know, you've been driving, I'm sure, for many years. Some of you might be swimming. Some of you could be bicycling. You know, any skill that you pick up, cooking, you know, design work, for example, or standing up and talking, or as a child walking, you know, none of that learning would stick if we weren't doing it and doing it frequently, regularly, forever. And that's very, very important. I believe the facilitation of doing, giving opportunity to do so that your skills do not go wasted. You know, muscles waste very quickly if you don't apply them, if you don't use them. And it's similar with learning. Learning actually dissipates more quickly if you don't give them the opportunity to do. So institutionalize it. And by institutionalizing, I mean make processes in which there is no other way but to do this. So Petrofax introduced what we call the Pathway program. It's a program for first-time managers, supervisors with some experience, and managers with you know, upwards of 5 to 7 years of experience. Now, there are 3 different phases of programs, and people actually move from one to the other. Yeah, 3 different stages, and all through the way they are given tasks and projects that they have to go back and apply in their departments, and we build a feedback loop. Okay, and we'll come to that in a moment when we talk about measures. Yeah, but quick question at this stage: do you actively take measures to reinforce learning after training is completed? Do you actually go back and reinforce? Do you have processes which make sure that the learning is applied? And if so, it would be great to know what kind of these processes are. If you haven't thought of them, then you know, there's food for thought, as I said. So that's our 3rd poll in progress, right, Israela?
Yes, yes, it's in progress. Few more seconds and I'll close it. Okay. So we have 45% yes and 55% no.
Yeah, no, that's good. Fantastic. So, so some people are taking measures, which is great, and they should see results. And you have to be consistent, obviously, with this. And if you choose a specific set of programs only and do this in a targeted manner, you're likely to be able to spend more energy in doing this. So another good example of institutionalizing something is, you know, change of processes, like interviewing processes. And we introduced competence-based interviewing for our recruiters. And we made sure there was no other way of interviewing in the company. That's it. You know, old habits out of the way, new habits in. This is what you've been trained in. This is exactly how you will conduct interviews. You know, performance appraisals. If you're introducing a new system and a new process, simple, you can't go back to your old ways. You've got to decommission systems, you've got to decommission old processes. That's the way to institutionalize changes, that people do not have a choice but to actually implement what they've learned. Very, very important. Let's look at measures now. You know, what is it that we can do? Now, you know, beyond the normal analytics, what I think we're all gunning for is change in behavior, change in performance. That's the bottom line of any training. Now, whether that's content-driven training, whether that's technical training, whether it's mandatory, where you need certifications, etc., to continue to operate, whether it's critical training like crisis management, etc., what we expect in the end is for people to learn it, apply it, become better at doing what they're expected to do, and continue to improve in their performance. That's what we're looking for. So some of the things that we have found useful, and some of it you might be doing already, some I would strongly recommend that you begin to do. And large organizations all over the world continue to do this. Reliance Industries, for example, has I think an 8-month-long program for new recruits, and they put them through their paces on site, on projects. They send them off to Jamnagar. People actually spend time in the working environment out there in the sun, and at the end of the day, when they come back after 10 hours, there's a manager waiting for them who will ask them, what is it that they learned, and provide them feedback. And this happens for, you can imagine, thousands and thousands of people who are recruited, and it happens religiously. So it's very important kind of processes that you put in. And I think a lot of companies do not focus on creating feedback mechanisms. That's very, very important. Excuse me. And without feedback, no learning ever happens. We all know that. We've been receiving feedback ever since we were babies. And even the topmost CEO of an organization will not learn unless there's some feedback. Now, that feedback could be self-reflection, contemplation, etc., as you go higher up. But for the vast majority, you need a mirror. You need somebody to give you feedback. And that's very important. And as training organizations or training departments, I don't necessarily think we do a lot in terms of building feedback mechanisms within our program design and setting. So that's something that I found very, very useful. In fact, when we introduce the pathway programs to the participants, we do the briefing, not only for the participants, but we do the briefing for every line manager of the participants. So the line managers get involved from the very first day of introduction to the program. They are told specifically what is expected of them before the program, during the program, and after the program. They are given an itinerary, and they are told exactly when they are expected to provide what feedback. We build feedback mechanisms through surveys with the departments. We do coaching and mentoring as part of the program, especially for experienced managers as well as our leadership excellence program. It's built into the design. And these are measures taken to make sure that learning actually endures. That when managers learn how to manage people, they don't go back to their old ways, but they actually manage it the way the company wants them to manage. If you're managing projects, then there's a Petrofac way of managing projects, for example. Similarly, there's an Infosys way of managing IT projects. Every company has its own way of either managing people, managing processes, or managing their projects and their business. And unless there is reinforcement through feedback, it is very difficult for employees to actually continue down the right path. So building feedback mechanisms is very, very important. You can do simple things after a training program. You can write to the manager. You could write to the subordinates of the participant. You could write to the peers of the participant. And you can ask them 3 simple questions. This is what the individual's undergone as part of training, and these are the skills that we expect him to demonstrate on the job. Are you seeing these? Where can this person improve? Do you have any good examples of where this person has applied it? 3 simple questions. It's not an ominous survey. It's not very detailed. It's just 3 simple questions asked to people in the 360-degree loop of the individual. So you get feedback from managers, you get feedback from peers, you get feedback from subordinates, you get feedback obviously from the facilitators and the trainers, and that wholesome feedback helps the participant. It's all geared towards ensuring that the participant's learning is continuous and people he knows are observing his performance. So he pays more attention to how he's applying his skills and improving his performance. And you check periodically. Our compliance program, which is actually a code of conduct. It's something that every employee in the organization is expected to go through, a code of conduct. And the code of conduct is designed, obviously, as an e-learning because easy access is important. We've got 200 different locations in which people are working. It's a mandatory course. Everybody has to complete it, but it doesn't stop by completing the e-learning. So every year, at the end of the year, you're expected to do another quiz based on the program that was completed. Now you'll get 10 random questions, all belonging to the code of conduct. And you are expected to clear it, because if you don't clear it, it is tied into your performance appraisal, and it will say it did not meet expectations on this particular target. So periodic learning happens. So before I sit through that, I make sure that I read the code of conduct. I go through the e-learning one more time. So that's learning reinforced. When I'm doing the questionnaire, I get feedback. If I go wrong, it tells me what the right answer is. So again, I learn. And at the end of it, if I haven't cleared it, scoring 80%, then I retake the test with 10 other random questions that come up. So that's built into the design. Okay, the setting is set. It's linkage to your performance appraisal. You have to do it. You know it's coming. In terms of experience, you're provided the e-learning. You can access it at any time. You're applying that learning, hopefully throughout the course of the year, because the processes will not permit you not to comply, with how you do business. And at the end of the year, you're doing a periodic check. Your certifications, back at Infi, when I used to work there, all IT engineers would have to have repeated certifications, and of course, Infi has beautiful campuses right across the country. The Mysore one is probably the best. It's a paradise for people who are being trained. So you stay in there, you finish your training, you finish your certification, then you get deployed to projects. And that certification is to be renewed periodically. You go to any offshore site in the UK, for example, people cannot work on an offshore rig or a platform without having the mandatory certifications. Those certifications are their permit to work, and they have to do it frequently. So they expire every year. Every year they need to do the certification, so which means every year they're learning. Yeah, and these are some of the ideas that you can actually build into even simple programs. Do communication skills, for example, in the first half of the year, make sure that you go back and periodically check if they're applying that learning. If it's a knowledge-based learning, like, I don't know, Microsoft Excel, Power BI, if it's department-specific learning, so if you're doing piping engineering or electrical engineering, or you're doing mechanical engineering, if you're doing finance, supply chain, any function, if you're doing functional training, it becomes easier actually to test knowledge. It becomes easier to assess them periodically. And in fact, at Infi, they even had an internal certification system, a framework, where people kind of graduate over a period of time collecting certificates. So there are multiple ways that you can actually build in measures to ensure that people are learning continuously and the learning sticks. Very, very important. Pilot training. Back in the day when Sahara Airlines used to be a functional airlines and it was a client of ours, we used to go audit people. That's a mechanism to make sure, that's a measure to make sure the learning is continuous. And we would audit the flight crew. We would audit whether they're actually performing all of the tasks they are expected to do. They would have spot checks. They would have surprise audits. They would have surprise emergency audits where the simulated environment, there's an emergency, you have to kind of land on water. How does the crew respond? Checking learning periodically. Pilots, you all know, they go through every other year, and they have to kind of upgrade themselves and they have to go through the simulations. And, pilot training actually happens in a simulated environment, which is very real. Again, Emirates Airlines, any big airline for that matter, has its own pilot training institutes and aviation colleges where all of this happens. So why do they do that? Why do they spend so much money on making sure that these feedback mechanisms are there and the learning is sustained and people are actually skilled in their jobs? Obviously, because lives depend on it. So again, choose your programs wisely. First of all, don't do any programs that don't have an impact on performance and change of behavior. If you feel that you're doing it just to make sure that the department can show numbers, then I don't think the company is benefiting. The company benefits if the participant actually improves in behavior and performance. And that's why I think when you look at analytics, you've got to make sure that you go beyond number of training hours, number of courses completed, percentage of completion in terms of targeted people. None of these actually tell you whether your program is actually effective. What will tell you whether it's effective or not is the actual performance of people and change in behavior, which you will have to collect through means of feedback, through means of surveys, by talking to people, by ensuring that your design actually has all of these elements, even as you propose that training program to a function or a department. So Azraela, if you could help us with this final poll. We're nearly there.
Yes.
Okay, we're done.
Yes. Okay. We have 20% with yes and 80% with no.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And it's an honest reflection, which is good. So some things that I found help in sustaining learning. Okay, there's not a conclusive list, but these are again ideas, food for thought, and you could think about in your own circumstances, given your own limitations, size of your teams, etc. You can think of applying some of these things. When it's technical in nature, the content of learning, technical or functional, when it's related to their particular function. Some of the things that you can quickly judge, you could use knowledge assessments, you could do on-the-job assignments and projects. So when we do the project delivery capability program in Petrofac, we've built in a simulated project at the end of the program. So a group of people have to come together and deliver a project. Yeah, it's as simple as that. We are an oil and gas organization. Petrofac is an oil and gas organization, and they do large projects building process plants. So there's engineering, there's construction, there's procurement of equipment, there's obviously commissioning and handing over, etc. But it doesn't have to be that big a project. If you're a finance person and you're running a finance course for your people, you could do small assignments in the area of finance, whether it's tax related assignments or whether it's actually financial management related projects. It's an assignment. Yeah, and our graduate development program has a large engineering component, and every week they get knowledge assessments. Every month they have to submit an on-the-job assignment. They actually get given a competence profile, which has about 30 skills that they are expected to become proficient with over a period of 2 years. And every 6 months, they undertake a competence assessment from their manager. So we get to know where their skills are. And every quarter, they're actually expected to provide a report of what they've learned and what they've applied, and it's signed off by their manager. So you can imagine in the technical area where we want them to be absolutely perfect with the skills that the company wants, we actually take that much pain to go through all of this. So certifications are important in certain areas, linkages to progression. So unless you're technically competent, certain jobs will just never be available to you. So that linkage is available, and then managers' feedback, as I just pointed out, is a constant element. Now, if you look at mandatory, straightforward, you're related to job-related consequences. That's one way of doing it. Certifications, which are periodically required, that's important. Knowledge assessments, if it's technical in nature, you could do. We are in fact, Petrofac just launched a safety program. It's called the life-saving rules. These are 9 life-saving rules given by the UK government for all projects of our nature in the oil and gas industry. And this program is actually designed as in 4 different languages, just to make sure that everybody kind of comprehends it. And through the course of the year, every employee, whether you're actually on site or not, or you're sitting in an office, undertakes a simulation-based, situation-based, caselet-based assessment. So you get given about 25 different situations, and you're expected to then respond to each of those situations based on your knowledge of life-saving rules and your understanding of what you have learned in your e-learning course that's been provided to you. Right? So again, a quick way to check whether we are all aware, where we are in terms of our safety learning, etc. In terms of leadership programs, I think this is something that's important in behavior, because you need feedback, without which you will not know if change is actually happening. So multiple level structure of advancement, from one program to the other, certifications, phases, like our management development program, active manager role from the very beginning and through the course of the program. 360-degree feedback has been introduced for managers who are experienced, as well as for the leadership program. And then there is institutionalized learning, which means we change processes, we change manuals of working, and we make sure that's the only way to work. Similar things that you could do with behavioral programs, move away from 2-day workshops, move on to e-learning if you want to do just basic soft skills, and you don't necessarily want change, but you want just awareness. You can just deploy it and people can read it on their own. Feedback mechanisms are very important for longer periods of time. So take feedback multiple times in a year, very important. And you're tied to performance appraisals. If there's a strong fit, then you will realize that people actually start changing their behavior. Very, very important. And one of the companies that I worked with previously had a very good idea. In fact, Petrofac did that later on. Any particular behaviors we wanted to inculcate, we turned them into company values. And company values are assessed as part of the performance appraisal. So if you want to make sure that people learn about these behaviors and they inculcate them and they apply them, and one way is to turn them into company values. Moving on to the last bit, which I think often we neglect. Training is not for everyone. It shouldn't be, in my opinion. Or there could be some training for everyone, but there needs to be specific training for people that really matter. And people who matter are people who are actually contributing, who will make sure that the company progresses, who are important for the company. And I'm not saying only in terms of performance, but also in terms of potential and the future, etc. So finding the right audience for your training programs is important. Oftentimes, we just roll out training for everyone, and then the effectiveness automatically comes down. Now, training is effective for people who are eligible for it. And by eligible, I don't mean qualification, but eligible in terms of competence and potential. Not everybody gets invited to the Shaolin Temple. You can't get through there. You and I can't. A certain degree of competence is required. Not everybody gets through to the elite programs in the world. Why? Because you need a certain set of skills, attitude, your experience, etc. So find the right people for your program. That is very, very important. Because if you just do it en masse, then chances are you will automatically bring down the effectiveness of the program. So choose your target audience wisely. Different horses for different courses, right? So you can't, not everybody is meant for management, not everybody is meant for leadership. So don't put every supervisor through that program. So be selective about who goes and does what. Every industry does that. Every elite training program does that. Now, if you go to the Defense Forces, you will find that every unit in the Defense Forces has a very, very high level of selection, and only those people who are selected undergo training. If you look at any sports event, any sporting team, whether that's at school, college, state, country, wherever, you will find only the right people are selected for anything that is intensive. So identify and define their needs correctly. Very, very important. So if it's a generic need, get more specific, identify what needs to change, and then target your programs specifically to that. Because if you don't, then again, learning will dissipate very quickly. Yeah. So ask a series of questions. Very, very important. Ask why this person should undergo this training. Ask how will the company benefit by putting this person through the training. Just ask yourself. And ask the same questions to people who are nominating these people. Very important. Ask, will they apply learning, and ask if there is the setting available to apply learning. These are questions that you have to ask the managers and the departments. And without this, really, a person should not be put through the program. It's a waste of time. And ask what else is required to ensure learning endures. So they might learn, they might apply it, but we want this learning to sustain over a period of 12, 18, 24 months. So what else will be required? So ask some of these questions before you actually invite people into a training program. And you make sure that long-term support is available, which is what we do for the pathways. We do it for the project management course. We do it for compliance. We do it for diversity and inclusion. We did it for the communication program. We do it for the management development programs. We do it pretty much for everything nowadays. It's been a learning journey. 15 years ago, when I joined Petrofac, we didn't have a learning culture. We didn't have training programs. We would have ad hoc programs in a year, maybe 4, maybe 5, on demand. And since that, we have kind of traversed and become a different beast altogether in terms of learning and development. So the culture is now pull instead of push. And we put in place all of these to make sure that we are effective. So I want to conclude by suggesting, this entire thing that I've discussed with you is either as complex or as simple as making tea, depending on what your skills are in terms of making tea. Some people find it very complex, some people find it really easy. So as we all know, a simple cup of tea requires certain ingredients, much like the elements that I've shared: setting, design, experience, measure, and the right audience. You need some milk, you need some water, you need sugar, you need tea leaves, and you need a source of heat. Of course, you need a pan in which you will make your tea as well, and some of the other paraphernalia that goes along with it. And all of that paraphernalia is the setting. And you'll also realize that not everybody has tea. Different people have tea differently. Some people with a lot of sugar, some people with a little less sugar, some people with no sugar at all, some normal. So that varies. So your design and your program will vary to different audiences. Not everybody is a tea lover. Not everybody takes tea. Finding the right audience is very, very important. And you will see that the end product is tasteful only when all of the individual elements have actually nicely blended and homogenized. If you get even one element wrong, the end product is wrong. So if you get the quantity of the milk wrong, or the water wrong, or the tea leaves wrong, or you cook it for a little too long, the heat isn't enough, or you're cooking tea in Ladakh versus doing it out in the plains of South India, there's a vast difference. And all of these elements actually contribute to making the perfect cup of tea. Right? And if it's raining cats and dogs, then suddenly, a cup of tea really feels like heavenly. So the setting again is very important. So whether you find it complex or not, this entire process of designing the program for effectiveness, for making sure learning endures, is you can think of it as a cup of tea. The next time you pick up a cup of tea, think of how that process happens and what you could actually draw out of it for your own learning and development initiatives. So with that, I think it's time for tea for everyone. So I'll hand over to Azraella to see if there are any questions to address.
Yes,
we could do that.
Thank you, Ganesh. You really closed it really well. Okay, so we do have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Mr. Garfield D'Souza, we do not have training in our organization, and I'm looking to start this in my organization. Need guidance on how to start.
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways to do that. It depends on the size of the organization and what is it that you are planning to achieve with it. But I think all training must start with an understanding of what is the current competence level. I'll take an example. So if you're looking to introduce training for a particular department, as an example, let's take finance or supply chain. Let's take finance. If you're planning to introduce training to them, I think the question to ask is, what is the purpose of the training? Why are we doing this? And what is it that we are trying to achieve at the end? So the answers could be like, okay, we have found a problem with some of our employees. They either do not know something, or they know something, but they don't know it well enough, or they know it well enough, but they're not able to perform a particular task well enough. Right? So what I'm gunning at, what I'm trying to figure out is what is their current competence level with the requirement of the department. And that is what you're going to be trying to manipulate with your training. You are trying to improve their competence levels. So every training must begin with understanding what is the competence requirement of the people who are going to be targeted for training. If you are going to be generally introducing training, in the organization, then I think it's important that you look at the setting first. So in terms of the setting, answer the questions like purpose for the function. What is it that the function will achieve? What is the roadmap for the function? What are the short-term goals? In the first year, what is it that you're going to achieve? Second year and third year. Get some stakeholder sponsorship. The chief abbot of the Shaolin Temple is very important. Without his blessings, nothing would happen. So without the blessings of either the group head of HR or the CEO, preferably, chances of people looking up and listening to this new initiative in the organization are very low. So get the CEO on your side and get him or her to do a little talk or a little blog or put an article out on your intranet website and set the scene to introduce training. And start small, because you'll have to test waters. You'll have to see whether there's uptake, whether you're actually becoming effective with this training. And then, of course, there are multiple other elements that obviously we can't discuss on the call here, but things like what budget's available to you, what kind of admin support is available to you, who will design the program. Things like these will have to be thought out in more detail as you go along. But your starting point needs to be confirm there is a need for training in the organization. Find a sponsor, the chief abbot, make sure that they are supportive, get them to talk about training and what's going to be offered. Have at least a rough roadmap for the next 1 or 2 years of what you're going to be achieving and who you're going to be targeting first. And then you go to the detail of identifying what competence you're going to be addressing and what is the gap in competence today. Because you will have to prove that that competence has actually improved at the end of your training. And without starting with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. If the change in behavior or performance is the end game, then work backwards to see what will allow for that to happen. Then you design your program. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Garfield offline, because this conversation will go on for half a day because there's so much that we can do to address this particular question. So we'll move on to the next one as well, if that's all right.
Okay. Mr. Pradeep Singh, how to measure ROI in leadership and behavioral programs?
Yeah, that's a classic program. And you'll see that I did not mention ROI in my measures because I have seen it fail plenty of times in the last 20 years. See, ROI is a good number to see if you can directly relate the performance outcome to a particular training, which we can't. There are just too many factors in an individual's performance that can be beyond training. So I undergo a leadership training program, let's say for about 7 days. Prior to that, let's say I wasn't happy with the company. And now that the company has put me through this training, I suddenly find a new love for my company and my department. I've suddenly got some more energy. It has nothing to do with the training content, you see. It's just that I've been acknowledged as a potential leader, and I've been put through that, and that transforms me, that transforms my performance, that transforms my motivation, etc. Now, I can't directly link it to the training and say because of the training my performance has improved. And if my performance does not actually result in a tangible output, no managerial or leadership role actually has a tangible output unless you are directly influencing either revenue or profit of the organization. And by that I mean you can look at the top line, you can look at the bottom line, and you can see how much of an impact the individual has made, the CEO has made, or the project directors have made. If it's a technical area like project delivery, yeah, and then you deliver a particular project on time or not, as a consequence of this training, that's the linkage which is very, very weak. So that's why I don't believe you can actually put an ROI. You can put an ROI for retail sales. Yeah, so if I train your sales force on how to sell more at a retail outlet when customers come in, and I watch them apply that particular process, and then I see what were the sales before that training and what were the sales after that training, then I can turn that profit, the return, on my investment. Okay, unless there is a measure like that which I can directly observe and I can capture, you will not be able to apply ROI. So for managerial and leadership programs, 360-degree feedback works brilliantly. Employee satisfaction surveys work brilliantly to show whether the individual has actually improved in his management skills or not, whether the individual has actually improved in leadership skills or not. So when you go through leadership excellence, for example, if you are directly you're heading the sales organization, for example, and you've been trained into leadership skills, does your sales department suddenly start to function more effectively? What kind of processes have you now changed in your department to ensure there's more sales or more revenue? If you're able to observe that, then you can draw a conclusion in terms of return on investment. Otherwise, it's a classic problem for the last 30-40 years. Everybody's been trying to address. How do you find an ROI for a behavioral skills program? Very, very difficult. So I prefer to look at other measures and feedback, and facilitating feedback and receiving feedback about people's performances is a fantastic way, because I, as a participant, I'm more aware that other people are observing. I become more aware that a 360-degree feedback is going to be taken. So my manager will tell the survey, my peers, my subordinates, all of them will feedback about what changes I've seen since the program's been conducted. And if I'm so specific about that, you can imagine the wealth of feedback you will receive, and you'll be able to improve the individual's performance. I think that's a worthy return on whatever training investment you do. So no, I don't have a clear-cut measure saying ROI for managers and leaders. Yeah, so that's why I've given other ideas for measures. I hope I've addressed the question. I'm sure he'd acknowledge that it's not an easy task to get ROI for behavioral skills programs. It's an age-old question. Go ahead, Isabella. We'll take a couple more. Yeah, if time permits.
Yes. So specific to hospitals, given the many current challenges, mix of personnel and different shifts, what tips would you share on how to roll out training in pandemic times, and also evaluate the efficacy of training imparted?
Yeah, now, I think the pandemic, of course, has challenged us tremendously, but it's also not benefited, I never should use that word, but it's given some kind of opportunity to deliver training virtually. Yeah. So I would begin by looking at the type of training that we are conducting for hospital staff. Now, depending on the departments they work in, it could be very different. The person sitting at the reception, for example, the kind of training they would have to receive is significantly different from somebody who is working in a lab, or a doctor who needs to pick up new skills, or nurses who have to be trained. The COVID protocol itself is a good example of training nurses and doctors and how to handle either COVID patients or any patient who's coming in for a diagnosis. The kind of preparation that would be required, your PPE, what you wear, and how you address the entire process of testing, for example. And I'm taking only one little example. As far as it's technical in nature, I strongly recommend that you put together a micro-learning video, which very specifically says what is the protocol and the process to be followed. And this micro-learning, of course, can be distributed across multiple platforms. People use mobile phones. Everybody uses mobile phones. And micro-learning nowadays is very easy on applications so that it's available to them. They can click on it, they can read it, they can look at it, they can learn from it anytime they want. That's one. In terms of whether they are actually applying it or not, your only recourse is feedback, because the application has to be at work, and obviously there are supervisors, there are peers who can provide feedback about an individual applying the learning or not. In terms of output or outcomes of not applying learning, especially in a hospital environment, I think we can all imagine what all can go wrong. The more critical your area of work, the more drastic or tragic the outcome can be. So if it's protocol process related training, deployed through microlearning, deployed through e-learning, deployed through manuals, handouts, and a great example is how to wash hands, right? I think 99% of the world didn't know how to wash hands, and what they kind of taught us about washing hands during COVID times is something that we should have been doing all our lives. Nothing extraordinary just for COVID. Yeah, so 20-second wash is something that we should have done forever. And hospitals, I know here, at least in the Middle East, every hospital, every nook and corner, every wash basin has this little handout stuck there, which teaches you. There's no way that you can miss it. The only way you'll miss it is if you close your eyes. So if you open your eyes, it'll be in your face. You will have to read it. You will learn. And over a period, you will learn. So you apply the same principle, is what I'm saying. Yeah, and delivery is easy now. You can deliver it through webinars. You can deliver it through virtual programs. You can record it. Recording is available for people. Applications are available. You can do micro-learning. So delivery is easy. Checking whether they're actually applying it or not has to be through feedback through supervisors. And in the hospital environment, it's actually very easy to do that, because any deviation from the process is immediately noticed, and it has consequences. So talk to people they work with, and you will know. And performance appraisals, ongoing performance appraisals. I don't mean reviews and discussions and things like that. I mean just looking at day-to-day performance and providing feedback to people about how they are performing is very important. So that's my take on how to deliver in the pandemic, because the tools are there now. Plenty of tools to put learning in your hands. You can do just-in-time learning. Every time you actually need to learn how to do a particular process, the video is available. Click on it, and you'll know what to do. And videos help. In any process training, videos help. So I would strongly recommend you use that.
All right. I think we can close with the Q&A for now.
All right, great.
Thank you so much for taking us to the framework on how learning should be. Very beautifully explained, and thanks for your time, for doing this session with us, for doing an amazing thought leadership webinar. I hope the attendees, you had a good session. I hope you're taking back some of these points at least back to your organizations to try and implement them, and please let us know if it works. So yeah, please watch out for more thought leadership webinar series such as this, powered by Adrenalin. And thank you so much, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Israela, for your help, and thank you, attendees, once again for your time and listening to me. Cheers all. Take care.
Bye.